Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome back to Have Your Say. I'm your host today, Brother Omar Dubois, and we're going to be touching down on a very important issue today. We're going to be speaking about racism. Now, this issue of racism has crept in our communities and has caused many problems, many problems for people throughout the whole earth. And many times, especially in our day and age, has become a big problem. And we're going to touch down on this a little bit. I have a wonderful guest here with me today, Brother Musa. I want to introduce him. MashaAllah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa
So, as you know, this is a very broad topic. We can't talk about it so much to the point where, we would like to exhaust this topic, as it's something that needs that, but we don't have much time. So what can we shed some light on this issue for me?
Racism is something that is systematic and it's something that we find that it's crept into every fabric of everyday life, and it's something that, most, or if not every, ethnic minority living in a community where they are the minority are going to have to face. It's something that we faced a long time, living here in the West and etc. But in terms of it in the wider community, regarding those that are outside the faith of Islam and not having those pillars that are erect up to kind of, stop it from, infiltrating the community, then there's not much we can go into in terms of detail to that, because we need to have systematic pillars put up to stop certain acts of not just racism, whether it be crime, whether it be, things that, affect a community, and racism being one of them. As being Muslims ourselves, we find that, from the prophetic, narrations and the hadith, is that we find many points of reference to show us that racism is something that is not accepted in our religion. It's something that we shouldn't tolerate. So the question we have is, how has it infiltrated our communities to such a high, regard in terms of everywhere that we find it, from the schools to the masajids to the workplaces to those expats that we find, whether it be Asian brothers that have travelled and left their families to work in the Arab countries that face racism, whether it be the blacks that face racism from Asians when trying to marry, whether it be the Asians that face racism with the whites trying to marry. It's just all Islam, all Muslims coming together to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for some reason we're finding this divide that is stopping us from doing mundane acts that should be something that we can do naturally. Something as simple as finding a job within your own Muslim community becomes hard. Something as natural to a Muslim as getting married becomes hard. Something as natural as just picking a school for your child to go and to learn and to study Islam becomes a racial issue. Is my child going to be, racially or okay in that environment? Are they going to be able to grow and to succeed the way that I want them to in such an environment where there could be racial tension? And us having to ask that question when the environment is an Islamic environment is something that's really, is something that really shouldn't be happening.
You and I were just discussing the simple fact that even there are many non-Muslims, blacks here in this country, for example, that are under the impression that a black person can't even be a Muslim.
Of course.
You understand?
So that is something that's hard to deal with, because especially if you come from a community, whereas that you come from a Christian background and you embrace the religion of Islam, and you feel like Islam is not really a religion that's embracive to other cultures. You feel like it's portrayed to have this strong sense of identity, which is not incorporate to everybody, which doesn't include everybody. So being a non-Muslim, when you look at Islam, for some reason, even though that we find that the Arab communities within Islam as a whole are a minority, they're not the population of Muslims across the world. The Arabs are not in the majority of them. Absolutely. There's more African Muslims than Arab Muslims. There's more Asian Muslims than Arab Muslims. But yet, the religion, when I mean Asian, I mean like South Asia, when I mean like Indonesia and Malaysia. But when you look at how Islam and the Muslims are portrayed is either an Arab religion or an Asian
That's how it's
religion.
portrayed on the
That's how it's
media, right?
portrayed on the media.
I just actually, it's funny, me and my mother were on the train system the other day, and we saw a sister, I believe she was from Indonesia or Malaysia, and I had to express to my mother, I said, little do people know that the area where she's from, I believe she was from Indonesia, the area that she's from has the largest Muslim population in the whole of the Muslim world. And so people are not informed about this. So do you think we need to do a better job as Muslims to inform people about this?
I think our PALPR, our representation of Islam as a whole, could be, much better. We shouldn't expect, other groups and other, faith groups and other ways of life to kind of promote Islam in a good light and what Islam's about. Today it's quite difficult, being that Islam is at the focal point of every TV program and every radio station and every type of documentary that takes place. Somehow radical Islam is involved. So it's hard for us to kind of deal with other issues that we have, like we're talking about racism, that kind of split us, because with racism you find that racism always comes to a trust issue, especially if you're a young child. If you go into a community where you feel like that trust and that bond isn't there, then you're not able to build that strong connection that you need, within friendships, within workplaces, within, schools and other, to build that strong connection of community, because you don't have that trust. You feel like that person thinks they're better than me because of my skin color. So now what happens is, especially when you're a young child, is that when you come across now a group of people that share the same skin color as you, and you don't have that divide of not trusting them, and you feel like the trust that you have with people that are of your own ethnic group is stronger than those that you share with your own religious group, that becomes problematic. Because then now you start to walk a line that is very thin in terms of, falling into kufr and falling into shirk, and that you find that, so sometimes you'll find people that would say that many communities, ethnic communities, will rather employ someone of their own ethnic background rather than their own religious background. So you see that people are prepared to take it to that extreme level of racism, you could say, in terms of who they employ and who they sit down with and who they work with.
And I think we as Muslims have forgotten that this was the sunnah of Iblis.
Of course.
This was his way. And so we as Muslims have rushed to pick up the sunnah and apply it to our way of life. And this is something very dangerous, because we know that many movements have formed out of, strictly nationalism, whether it's been African Americans, whether it's been Arabs, whether it's been, many different people many groups have evolved because of racism. With that particular action in mind, of saying we are better than everyone else. I was reading a book earlier speaking about this, touching down on this, and there was a man that used the fact that African Americans at the time were being persecuted, and he used this as a means to brainwash them. And we know about many movements like this that have formed in America. Use this, so he would say things such as, the black man is God, for example. So these are the extremes that we see people go to. What do you have to say about this?
I would agree. I would say that a lot of, I feel like sometimes people try to fight fire with fire.
Right.
So you find that the KKK, neo-Nazis and people like this, that have this strong belief of, the Aryan race and, the white race being superior to any other type of race, and, being a godly race, and using the Bible to say that Jesus is white and Jesus is God and God is godly. Absolutely. And they're from that type of race, and using scripture and ideas to form a way of understanding and a way of life. You find like sometimes some of these black groups, they form from this hatred of these other type of, racist groups, and then they just hold a similar torch with a different color, and they propagate and send out the same type of signals. And they also now, from saying, okay, if God's white, well, we're going to make him black, and if this is this, we're going to make it that. And then you just find two people on two different, sides of the fences. Then you have it's like
So it takes people to extremes.
of course, it takes people to extremes, but when you have like when there was the genocide in Rwanda with the Tutsis and I forget there was a genocide in those two parties of different tribes that were going against each other. You found like the only people that never entered this were the Muslims, and within the Muslim communities in Rwanda, they found that there was nobody that was involved in the genocide because they never took to this partnership of associating themselves with tribes and stuff like that. They never participated in it, and it was something that was, you know, the wider community looked at as, you know, why did they not fall into this? But it just shows, you know, when a community of people implement what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us with the deen, that you can save yourselves from a lot of heartache, because through this came, you know, thousands of murders, and many women, children and men lost their lives in this small genocide. So it shows that as Muslims, if we want to, you know, show our community and to kind of find a way out from this, we're going to have to return back to the authentic sources of the Quran and Sunnah. But when you find as a community that we're also scared to talk about race because, you know, it brings division. So you find the people that would say, if you talk about race, it's just going to divide the people, let's not talk about it. But then when you find that those that are being oppressed due to racism, they want to speak about it. Absolutely. Because they want a solution to it.
So you can't just sweep it under the rug, because that causes a bigger problem. So would you say that this has to be presented, especially it is I feel that it is a job, especially those of influence, people that have influence and people of knowledge, to have knowledge to make sure that they speak out on these issues in a balanced way, and making sure that they don't go to either extreme. Because when you sweep things under the rug, as we know, it just becomes a bigger problem.
It's problematic. I find that one of the things that, or one of the paths that allow people to accept the religion of Islam is that they find that so many things that was hidden from them about history and how ways of life have transformed are in Islam, but they weren't taught as a child. So when Christians hear about the story of Musa alayhi salam, the story of Isa, and they hear it with the evidences that's brought forward by the Quran and Sunnah, they think, why wasn't I told about this?
Absolutely.
You know, they feel cheated.
They feel cheated.
So
right.
when they embrace Islam, they're happy because they feel they've been cheated with Christianity.
Right.
And I feel like the problem that the Muslims are going to have now, if they don't continue to get deeper in terms of telling our history, because like we know from authentic hadiths about Luqman alayhi salam and the Prophet Musa alayhi salam being of black skin and a black origin. Absolutely. So now, if Muslims don't teach this to their young children, whether it be an Arab Muslim, an Asian Muslim, Chinese Muslim, if you don't teach this to your children that, you know, the Prophet Musa alayhi salam or Luqman, that they were from this cultural background and their lineage and who they were as a person, when the first time a young, you know, Muslim male at the age of 30 years old is walking down the road and some Hebrew Israelites, and they start to tell him that, you know, this and that, and that, you know, Prophet Musa was this, he was black, and
he's going to feel cheated once again.
He's going to feel cheated again.
He's going to feel
say,
cheated.
well, no one told me this.
No one told me this, and as a result, before they even tell him that, he's going to develop an inferiority complex. You understand? Because many people are clueless. Even Adam alayhi salam was black. You understand? I actually, we were giving dawah on the corner one day, and we happened to mention that for whatever reason. We were speaking to a group of people, just expressing to them that prophets, number one, they were of all different colors. Allah said he sent prophets to all nations and tribes. But however, in this day and age, it's become such a major issue that to mention someone that is black is very strange today.
It's irrelevant to us, because as Muslims, it's irrelevant. We have Sahih Bukhari, the descriptions of the prophets are there in the Sahih Hadith, and you know, it's clear for anyone to go and find, but it's irrelevant. And sometimes I feel like when I, as a black person, tell other black people that it's irrelevant to me, they feel like you don't have that same love for the black community, right. So you feel like you're fighting two different type of battles. But as a Muslim community, it's irrelevant what colours the prophets were and what they wasn't in terms
it's irrelevant.
of
exactly.
in terms of worship,
absolutely.
in terms of the message that they brought. But if it has relevance to your life in that it'll
mention it,
and that it'll bring a benefit and it'll bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we'll mention it. It's not a problem, but we have to mention it in its context and its due right. Not to mention it in terms of boasting or to have some type of superiority over another individual, because we feel like whenever Bilal's mentioned to the black community, they feel like he's mentioned to them in terms of to downgrade them, because Bilal was known as one of the slaves that was freed. And the black people till today are trying to get away from slavery, are trying to get away from being connected to slavery. So if you just, so as some Muslims, most Muslims I'd say, not some, mention Bilal in a way to show in a good light. They don't mean bad by it, but what they don't understand, that mentioning Bilal to a black Muslim only brings him back to that same understanding which he's trying to get away from.
I actually experienced a situation myself in a particular country. A brother was buying a flat, and the person he was buying the flat from didn't know that he understood their language, and realized that this person was saying something racist in regards to black people. And so when he informed the person that he understood what he was saying, the person said, "Oh, no, I'm not like that, because Bilal is Bilal." Everything goes back to Bilal, as if there weren't many Sahaba that were of color. And so, and I was speaking to a brother about this, and it's because of how much it matters today. How much it matters today to people where they don't know about these people. You understand? It wasn't necessary to mention which Sahabi was black or white or whatever. It wasn't necessary. You know, we hear about many times where they were from, but it wasn't necessary to mention their color all the time. You understand?
And even today now we find that many of our brothers and sisters from the Asian continent, from Pakistan and Bangladesh, that work in the Arab countries, they face some very bad treatment, you know, due to their background. And this is something also that they find that we speak about, you know, they can't comprehend it. They feel like, how is it that these, you know, we look at our Arab brothers are those that the religion, you know, the deen of Islam was revealed in your mother tongue. It was revealed in your language. It was revealed so you could understand it clearly from birth to where you are today. So how is it that you are able to treat our brothers and sisters from Pakistan and, you know, and Bangladesh and that part of Asia in such a way? And I feel like this type of racism also feeds into this concept of creating these groups within Islam, you know, that, you know, these Wahhabis, this is how they are, and these guys are like this and like that, because it all comes through this door of racism, this door of thinking that, you know, of hizbiyah, of partnership, of thinking that, you know, you're better than another group of people. And I feel like it's causing a lot of hatred, tension within the Muslim community. How it's creeped in, I can only go back to colonialism, you know, and the part that played in many of the Arab countries that you find today, with the French in North Africa, and you find with the part that the English played in the downfall of the Ottoman Empire, and their infiltration in terms of what took place between the Ottomans and the Arabs at that time. And I find that a lot of this has crept in, you know, even with their, you know, with the creation of such countries like Kuwait. And then we know about Africa in terms of, you know, the European countries that, you know, had colonial power of many of the countries in Africa. I feel like, that being said, many of the people, you know, and many of the countries that they had strength and power over were Muslim countries. And that's why when you find that some of the early slaves that were taken to America were from a Muslim background. And this is how I feel like the Nation of Islam were able to kind of to go back to understanding that Islam was a black religion, because the Nation of Islam say if we look at
they use that.
Yeah, because they say if we look at our forefathers that were brought from Africa, they were Muslims, they weren't Christians. So they're happy to embrace Islam, because as far as they're concerned, the slaves that were brought here were Muslim slaves, but they were beaten and forced to take on Christian names, so they can understand that. But what the nation failed to understand, how did that Islam reach Africa in the first place?
That's right.
Where did the message come from? Because as far as they're concerned, it started in Africa. They don't see the transition of the dawah that was given through trade and stuff like that, and, you know, and the Sahaba.
Absolutely, this is another example of going to extremes.
Yeah, of course.
Because they use that as a tool to, once again, condition African Americans with something else. They start to the point they start worshiping themselves and not worshiping Allah.
And that's it.
You know?
And that's it, because they connect the pre-Islamic era of slavery from the early Arabs, that were involved in slavery deep, around, in Mecca at the time and in other Arab countries. They connect that early involvement that the Arabs had prior Islam coming to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu. Because remember, when the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu came with a message of freeing slaves and giving them rights and them having rights and this and that, the pagan Arabs at the time were like, what are you talking about, slaves have rights? They don't have rights. So it shows that the pagan Arabs before Islam were deeply involved in slavery. But as for every non-Muslim, especially from the black community, every Arab is a Muslim and every Muslim is an Arab. So as far as they're concerned, no matter what type of involvement that the Arabs had beforehand in terms of, being involved in slavery, they look at it as they were Muslims, even though the message wasn't with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at the time when the Arabs were involved in slavery in such a mass, in a mass number. They just, because this is how small their window of looking at the situation is. So this is how it's easy for especially the black community that has that tension with ownership, slavery, and being oppressed.
And as we see, this is a long topic, man. Yeah. And this is something that we may even have to do a part 2 on. I believe we're running out of time now, unfortunately. And definitely we gotta finish the topic. It's not something that is, 22, 25 minutes can cover. Brothers and sisters, as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very lengthy topic. Very lengthy topic. What can I say? One of the things I want to say is I hope that someone that's watching was able to take some benefit from this. And what can we say as a solution for this problem? We have to return to our religion, brothers and sisters. We have to return back to our religion and stop following the footsteps of shaitan. And this is because we know this is the way of the shaitan. And I hope each and every one of you, inshallah ta'ala, will tune back in to have your say. And I'll see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.